All right, welcome aboard, gang. It's time for the Mac Forum Sunday night video chat as usual. I'm your host, Sly Dude, on the forum here with the video chat this week. I hope that you enjoy what we have on the agenda for you. We've got one or two tips, but really the bulk of the show is going to be Yosemite related information. We'll have some links for you, some potentially helpful advice, or some things that I hope you will find helpful. Um, and along with that, as I say, most of that will be related to Yosemite and its release this week. To be honest with you, I was not expecting the final release to drop this week, given that they dropped a beta release and then literally just a couple of days later, dropped a release on top of that. So they dropped a beta release, and then a couple 3 days later, you get the final release that goes live for public use. Was not expecting that, really. My apologies if I'm a little bit distracted tonight. I got one eye on the TV screen to keep an eye on the Broncos game later tonight to see if Peyton Manning sets the record for most touchdown passes in a career. He's probably going to break that record tonight. The odds that anybody holds Peyton Manning under 3 touchdowns in a game are pretty slim, short of him, twisting an ankle on the way out of the tunnel there. He's probably going to break this record tonight. So I'll have one eye on the game, one eye on my notes for the show, just to give you an idea. So let's dive right into the information that we have for this evening. Hopefully you can get hopefully the audio is sounding pretty good. I'm using my headset mic today. This microphone was not working previously in the beta, and I've had some issues with it before, even under Maverick, but it seems to be working okay now in the final release. So we'll see. Right off the bat, I want to tell you we have 279,814 threads, which are comprised of 1,547,794 posts. And those statistics have been piled up by 283,095 members. And our newest member I'm not even going to try to pronounce this. It's Ed BTQ WPNVL. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that acronym. Sorry about that. I don't need a tongue twister for this evening. Before we dive right into the Yosemite information, let me point out, well, first of all, I want to say hello to Van Smith, who couldn't join us tonight. He apparently has joined a weekly dodgeball type league, and I was curious as to how he was allowed to do that. I thought you were required to play hockey if you were Canadian, but hey, we hope that he catches the show later on the video. All right, and now that we've gotten the stats out of the way, I want to point out that there's some things that we want to take a look at. First of all, before we even get into the Yosemite information, as you know, when Yosemite came out, there are some apps, including some Apple apps, that need to be updated. And some of our users are finding, for example, that with Pages, they're having a problem with some documents opening correctly, some documents not opening correctly. And there is probably a reason for this. There could be a number of reasons for it, including corrupted documents. But here's one of the things to look at. If you get a document that won't open, and then another document that will, Before you delete the document that won't open thinking it's corrupt, take a look and see, do a get info on it and see which version of Pages is set to open that document. Because check the open with section. Because here's what happens with Pages, and I think this happens with some other, it may happen with Numbers as well. When you install a new version of Pages, unlike some applications, the new version does not necessarily overwrite the original version, the older version. That older version will get put into a folder, which is great if you need to back up. But it does mean that sometimes the wrong version will try to open a document, and things get a little confused. So you need to go in and experiment and see which version you need to open that document. That's not an idea that I thought up. I'll post, given the appropriate credit in the show notes, because I don't remember. I think it was member Chaskag that came up with that. I don't remember for sure. We'll post that in the credits section. I'll tell you what, member Chaskag did figure out. Here's another tip that I did not know, because I don't use File Vault. One of the reasons I don't use File Vault is that although it provides you with a level of protection on your documents by encrypting stuff, it can pose some interesting headaches if you ever needed troubleshooting and for some other things. So here's one that you might need to be aware of. Some users go into their settings and set OS X, OS 10, so that it automatically, so that the Mac automatically logs in. In other words, you don't need to enter any information into the login screen. It's when you hit the power button, the Mac boots straight to the desktop. I personally don't like that. I don't use that. Don't get me wrong. Here's my problem with it. I run the majority of the time out of a admin account. If I were to set my machine that way, I am giving somebody admin access if they walk past or if they happen to get a hold of my machine. Okay, so first tip for you is, if you're going to use automatic login, do not automatically log into a admin account. Set it so that you're logging into a standard account. Then that way, when you get asked for for passwords, for an admin password, you can simply enter the name of the admin account and admin password. You don't have to be logged in all the time as admin to install software, but you do have to know the admin account, so you can auto log into a standard account, for example, and really restrict how much damage somebody could do. So what the tip, though, that I wanted to point out, and I'll post the link to this in the forum or in the show notes later, is this. If you're trying to enable automatic login, you've got to go in to the control panel, the appropriate control panel. I'll tell you where that is in just a second. I believe it's in security. Let me just double check that info for you. To get into automatic login, you're going to have to go to the go into your settings and adjust a few things. But when you go to make that adjustment, okay, it's under when you go to make that adjustment. Excuse me for a second, I had a little problem there. When you go to make that adjustment, here's the problem that you're going to run into. When you try to set up automatic login, if you have File Vault enabled, that won't work. The two kind of contradict each other, or to a certain extent conflict with each other. Okay, so you can't have both of those things going at the same time. To get to automatic login, you're going to go to the security and privacy settings, click on the lock, authenticate, which means you enter your username, an admin username and password, and then you have to choose whether you want to enable or disable automatic login. You can't enable automatic login if you have File Vault enabled. And the File Vault is in a different tab in that same preference pane. You can't have both going. And if you think about it, having an auto login kind of defeats the purpose of File Vault, because the whole purpose of File Vault is to keep people out of your computer. So unless it's you. So that's something that I had not thought of, because I don't generally use File Vault. It kind of gives me a headache. It's okay, I suppose, but there are other ways of achieving secure machine and other ways of securing your data rather than using File Vault. All right, now that we've taken care of those things, let's move on to a chunk of the Yosemite goodness that we have for the evening. As I mentioned earlier, Apple dropped the public release of Yosemite this week. We've had many of our members on the forum updated with no issues. I did not have any issues with the update. Some people are experiencing a few issues here and there. Don't get me wrong, no OS release has been perfect. Van Smith has apparently been really frustrated by this release. First thing you're going to notice, if you were not part of the public beta or the developer betas, one of the first things you're going to notice when you do run Yosemite is that it looks different. The icons look different. They very much resemble in many ways the iOS updates of recent weeks. But we'll talk about that in a bit, and may reserve some of that for the next show. So I did not have a lot of issues, but some people did. And I want to give you some tips that I think will help you in deciding, first of all, whether you want to update, first, whether it's possible to update your machine to Yosemite, second, whether you want to, and third, how to go about doing it. So let's take a moment and have a look at this. Officially, the requirement for updating to Yosemite is that you have to either have Snow Leopard, which is 10.6, 10.6.8 Snow Leopard, Lion, which is 10.7, Mountain Lion, 10.8, or Mavericks installed on your machine already. You've got to have one of those as a starting point. You've got to have at least 2 GB or more of memory. Now, officially, Apple says 2 GB. Most of the time, Apple's floor requirement for memory means that you will get decent performance at that level. They tend to set their system requirements for an OS to a point where you get a decent performance. But in this case, can you put Yosemite on with 2 GB? Yes. Is it going to run well? Probably not. Some of our members have said that it is a little slow with 4 GB. I can't really test that very effectively. I have 8 GB at the moment, and I have to tell you, for me, even though the minimum says 2, 4 GB would be better. And to be honest with you, if you have multiple applications open on a regular basis, you're going to want to have 8 GB. Now, on the upside, the last couple of versions of OS 10 have used memory more efficiently. So if you have 4 GB of memory and you want to try it, and there aren't other impediments to your machine, do that. But we'll talk about some steps that I think you need to take in just a minute. And in addition to the memory requirement, you need to have at least 8 GB or more of available space. And let me be honest with you, if you've only got 8 GB of available space, you need more available disk space. That's the minimum needed for installation. But to be honest with you, every incarnation of OS X that I have used, and I've been with it since the beginning, when you got to just a few gigabyte of hard drive space left, things really started to slow down. It needs space for the swap files, the memory files that get paged out when memory gets full. If you do not have sufficient space, things are going to really slow down. Will it run? Yes. I've run my system to the point before under Leopard, I think it was, where I was down to a few hundred megabytes. And I did get a warning from the OS about it needing more space, but that's not good. And don't get me wrong, the machine was incredibly slow when that was going on. So you want to take care of that. So officially the requirement is that you have Snow Leopard or higher on your machine, that you have 2 GB of memory and 8 GB of available or more of available space. If you were running Maverick on your machine, you weren't using some kind of hack to install it, you can run Yosemite. All right, so I'll have the link to the Apple page about that. Apple also has another page on their site which lists specific requirements for specific features. For example, certain features of Yosemite are not supported on older Macs. Handoff and some of the other features do not behave themselves on older Macs, may not even be possible. Apple's upgrade page has a little bit of information about that. And there's also another link that I have from BGR that basically lists briefly a few other things that do not work on the older machines. And once you've gone through those two things and you've decided, okay, I've looked at the new features, my machine can handle it, I really want those features and I want to install Yosemite, one of the next things that you need to take a look at is it going to break my applications? There are some apps that are going to need to be updated. Carbon Copy Cloner, for example, Mike Bombich already has an update to get that up to speed so that it works under Yosemite. But there are other application considerations. If you want a good indication without having to just install and hope, here's another place to check, because there's no point in going through the update process if it's going to break something that you really need. First question to ask yourself, am I still using PowerPC software? If you are, then you don't want to upgrade to Yosemite, because remember, 10.6 is the last OS that supported the PowerPC software. Then the other thing you want to look at is, do the apps that I use, are the apps that I use on a regular basis Yosemite ready? Okay, and a good place to go for that is roaringapps.com. They have a table that you can look up. You can search the site about any software that you're concerned about. They've also updated the site recently. It's got a lot of good information about both iOS updates and OS X updates. And they've updated the way the site reacts a little bit better. It's a little smoother. It's a much nicer thing to use now. Has a lot of really good information that you should look through if you're contemplating an update but you're not sure if it's going to break your applications. All right. Let's say now that you have decided that you want to upgrade. Your machine can handle it. You're not going to break a bunch of apps. You're all set to go. It's got things that you're ready to do. You're all set to go, and now you need to know how to go about it. Okay, that is a little bit different issue, and we're going to tackle that now to give you some tips. This may not be everything that you need to consider, but it's certainly important. Give me just 1 second. I want to double check something. A couple of things that you want to think about as you're moving forward with the decision to update. You got everything set to go. You know that you can update, and you know you've looked at your software. You know that you still want to. Okay, here are some steps and some questions that you really need to answer. It will cut down on your headache factor considerably. First of all, is your Mac currently running well? Whether you're running Yosemite, whether you're running Maverick, whether you're running Mountain Lion, Snow Leopard, whichever OS you're currently running right now, okay, the first question is your Mac currently well and stable at the moment? Okay? And that not only means, is it crashing or not? Yes or no? And is it being incredibly slow? Does it seem to have slowed down? Because if it has, one of the things you may want to do is to run disk utility and let it verify the hard drive and make any repairs. I'm not talking about permissions repairs here, because those will get changed as needed during the installation. What I'm talking about is repairs to the directory structure on the drive. We get posts regularly from people whose Macs have started to slow down. And part of the problem is that the directory structure on the drive is a mess, or the drive is showing the first signs of failure. So one of the things I think you need to do, I don't do it every time I upgrade, but I certainly do it if I'm experiencing a slowdown, is take a look, run disk utility over that drive. It's going to take a couple of minutes, but it's well worth the headache. The second thing is to make a backup. Okay, now you can use a Time Machine backup, because Time Machine backs up your system files, etc., 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 unless you've made changes. The problem with using a Time Machine backup at this step is, let's assume you wanted to back up to Maverick. The big reason for having a backup is this. Let's assume you don't like Yosemite. You're running Maverick, you download Yosemite, and you don't like it. The easiest way to back up to Maverick is going to be reloading from your backup. The easiest way to roll back, so to speak, is going to be to roll back from a backup. It saves you the trouble of having to reinstall Maverick. So here's what you need to look at. How do I do that backup? You could use Time Machine. The problem with using Time Machine is you would have to reinstall Maverick and then reload from Time Machine. And if you left Time Machine on while you're running Yosemite, you've got to be careful and pick a backup point before you install Yosemite. For this part of preparation, I really prefer a bootable clone. Take a tool like Carbon Copy Cloner or Super Duper, which seem to be the two that most of our users prefer. Make a bootable clone of your, whether you're running Snow Leopard, Lion, Mountain Lion, Mavericks. Make a bootable clone. Now, remember, I'm assuming that you've already checked your system out and proved that everything is functioning well. Make a bootable clone of this. This is going to be your restore point should you decide that you don't like Yosemite. Once you've got that bootable clone done, boot from the clone and test it. This has only happened to me once or twice, but I have had situations where the clone did not boot properly. And I didn't discover it because I didn't test the clone. Test that clone, boot from it, make sure that it boots. Now that you've done that, go back to your main drive, restart, go back to your main drive, and go ahead to the App Store and start your download of Yosemite. It's going to take a while depending on the speed of your internet connection. And if you've got a situation where your internet connection is not really stable, that's probably not the best situation for starting that update. That can really annoy you, both in terms of the time and the possibility that something corrupts during the download. So once you get it downloaded, at some point, the file will have finished downloading. You will see the Yosemite screen, and you will be asked if you want to continue the installation. Now, this is important. If you want to make a bootable thumb drive, okay, then you need to stop right here. Don't close the installer or anything. Just kind of stop what you're doing. Go and find that installer file, okay? It's going to be in your applications folder, in your main applications folder, and make a copy of it. You might even want to follow the steps to make the bootable drive then. Personally, I don't. I just save the installer somewhere. But the reason you want to save the installer is if you don't do that, when you finish the install, then things are going to delete the installer. That's a normal part of the process. So you need to make your bootable install drive, or at least save a copy of the file right then. Once you've done that, okay, now you can go back, continue the installation, let it completely finish, okay? And when it's finished, if you reboot and the system hangs, okay, try booting again. Because a couple of members have reported that they had some initial problems the first time Yosemite booted, and they were forced to reboot the machine. In other words, it never completed the boot the first time, and they had to go back and reboot. And once they rebooted, everything was fine. That's my suggestion to you. The other suggestion that you will see on the forum is the difference between a clean install versus an upgrade. Now, some users have found that the last couple of releases, starting with about Lion or Mountain Lion and moving forward, that their installation was kind of slow if they did an upgrade install. I have not experienced that problem. The last several OS installations I've done as upgrade installs. I didn't wipe the drive and do a clean install. But certainly, if you find that Yosemite is being slow and you've run a disk utility to check the drive, then one of the things, and the drive comes up healthy, one of the things that you might consider is whether a clean install will help. I personally am finding that for me, Yosemite is at least as fast as Maverick was on my machine, perhaps a tad bit faster, although not enough to be really noticeable. I'm still shaking out a lot of my software to see some things may be running better than others, but my performance seems to be at least as good on Yosemite as it was on Maverick. So if you have been running Maverick and you now start Yosemite and you see a significant degradation in performance, something is wrong. Something is not quite squared away, and we need to get that checked out before you go any further. I know that's a lot of information to absorb at once. I've supposedly been working on a blog post, an article about upgrading to Yosemite. Haven't gotten as much done on that as I would like, but that will be coming up soon, probably later this week, about midweek, somewhere in there. I should have that squared away. I have to say, having run the public beta since it came out, the transition for me to the final release was fine. Now, what I did is I put the public beta on a separate drive. And when I ran my update for the final version, I just put it on my main drive. In other words, I didn't install over the public beta. I literally took the drive that had the public beta on it and used that to clone my system. And then I put Yosemite on my main system because it has been stable for me. I noticed that under the public beta, my microphone for this headset was not working. It apparently is now. I tested it yesterday under FaceTime, and it works. So that's good. The one performance issue that I'm having right now, and I'm not entirely sure what is causing it yet, is that when I have iTunes running, if I go to iTunes and I click on the play pause button, there seems to be a little bit of a lag between when I push the button and when it gets, when it actually takes effect. So I'm not sure what's causing that there yet. That was not present in Mavericks to any, or not to any extent that I noticed anyway. So I'm still gonna have to do some troubleshooting on that. I'm not saying necessarily that it is a Yosemite problem. It's just something that I've noticed. Another thing you might notice, I have a couple of Apple scripts that I have been using. They ran fine under the beta. In fact, they performed better under the beta than they did under Maverick. They, in the sense that there was one line that I expected to do one thing. It did not work reliably in Mavericks, but did work reliably in the beta. Some of my Apple scripts seem to be working fine. There are one or two, and I don't have a lot of them, that I've got to go back and take a look at and see what the breakdown might be. It could be bad coding on my part. I am not an Apple scripter. This is just something that I cobbled together. The script that I am trying to use, I saved as a service so that it's available anywhere. And what the service does is when you hit a particular hotkey, it skips forward 30 seconds in whatever track is playing, or skips forward 1 minute. I've also got one that skips backward 1 minute. And I use this a lot when I am listening to audiobooks, because I find that there are times when I'm listening to an audiobook, something distracts me, and I miss something, and I need to go back and hear it. And if you just use the rewind and forward buttons, it's hard to get to the right space. Even if you use the slider, you can't get back. I find that clicking in the slider bar, I go too far back. I may only need to back up a minute or two, and I've actually backed up 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. That's one of the few things that I don't like about running audiobooks in iTunes. So I did a little service that skips backwards 30 seconds, skips forward 30 seconds, skips backwards 1 minute, skips forward 1 minute. These work with any iTunes with an iTunes track, so you can use it with music. It's just that most of the time I don't use it with music, but you could. It's not confined to audiobooks in any way. It's something I cobbled together. It's not the greatest piece of code, but it gets the job done. And I have some other things that I haven't tested yet. Some automator things that I haven't tested yet to see if they're working fine under the beta, because I don't need to use them often. I will warn you, though, that if you are a heavy automator user, you probably know by now that sometimes when a new release comes out, automator wrecks it. So you need to check that out and see what's going on. But that might be another thing to go forward with and look at before you update. So I hope you found all of that. I hope you found all of that Yosemite information helpful. It's something that I tried to just keep an eye on over the last 3 or 4 days. Over the next week, we'll be keeping a closer eye on this kind of stuff and hopefully have more information. As I say, I'll post the links to all this information in a little bit. It'll be later tonight, and then we'll go from there. The recycling stuff that I had intended to talk about this week, I've pushed off till next week. I'd like to double check a few more things. I specifically want to make sure I have a good procedure to let people know what they need to do if they're getting rid of or selling a Mac now that so much of the machinery that's available does not use an optical disk as a restore point. When you go to put an OS on those machines, you have to be careful, because the OS is tied to your iTunes account, not to the machine. And obviously, if you wipe the drive and then install, say, Mavericks, when you run the installation, it's going to be looking for, the next time it updates, the user is going to have to put in iTunes credentials. They need to tie that up and install to their account. And I'll have some information about how to do that. I think Jake posted some ideas about that. Hopefully we'll have him back with us next week. It can be another Jake show with some more tips. But that's something that I'll be looking at. Have a few other tips about recycling iOS and Mac equipment. And I hope that you'll enjoy that, but I want to make sure the information is correct before I include it in any kind of help form or anything like that. So looks like that's going to just about do it for this week, for what I had for this week. I hope that you enjoyed the information. I hope you find it useful. I'll have all this information posted both in the notes underneath the Google page and also in the thread that announced this week's show. Until next time, this has been your host, Sly Dude, and I hope you've enjoyed the Sunday night Math Forum video chat. I'll see you next week.